many ways, I am a product of the times. In fact, in each chapter, you sort of preface with the major political, legal, and societal changes of the times. What would you say between the current pandemic and also the weeks of protests that, of course, has refocused all of us around the topic of racial injustice? What type of people do you think these times are really producing?
You know, I think that's an excellent question, and I'm going to take a little latitude on that, because why did I do that? Why did I think it was important to have before every chapter of my book, you know, a history lesson of what was happening to Blacks, what was happening in minority business, what was happening in civil rights, what was happening in the world, and who were the major decision makers in the United States during that period of time. So I'm giving my age away, but back in the 50s, I remember Eisenhower and Stevenson, and they kind of set the tone for when I was starting out in my career in high school almost. Who were the people who were going to really have a tremendous impact on me in my career? And I tried to do it, and it changed over time. But I was always very honest in those prefaces by saying Black people were suffering a long time ago. I could give examples of race rioting. I could give examples of lynchings. So it's not anything new. It's something that's been a part of it. And I think the reason I did it also is because I was a product of the civil rights movement. If it hadn't been a civil rights movement, I wouldn't have been the first Black in McKinsey. I'm very honest in saying that. But seeing all these people who really died for me, supported me, mentored me, it was very important to kind of have that as a career measuring, you know, where I was at each point of time. And I think, you know, it's a lesson. And it's sad. And Robert S. Smith came out with his recent goals in terms of 2%. And I wrote in LinkedIn, and I said, this is a great idea. It's a great concept. I just wish we had started it 50 years ago. And if we had started 50 years ago, we wouldn't be having the problems now. And I feel very, very sincere about that. So I saw the riots of 1968, and I saw the response of corporate America. I saw the response of our communities. But I think this is different. And I think it's very important why it is different. I think, one, people are just tired. They're tired of hearing the same thing that they've been hearing for 20 and 30, in my case, 40, 50 years. Just tired. I think the other thing, which is very, very important, is I think corporate America, and we'll say the Business Roundtable, is finally accepting the fact it is not just about brown and Black people, it's about our society. And unless we get it right for those people, then their corporations are going to suffer. America's going to suffer. So I think that's another reason why I think these times are different. But I think the most important thing, and that's why I'm so humbled to be on this Zoom meeting today, is because of people like you, young people who have been able to go to the right schools, interface with a lot of people, learn so much more. There's so much commitment to affect change. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. They're not just 100 people, they're thousands and millions of young people, what I call the millennial group, or even the younger, who are saying it has to be a change going on. And that's not gonna change. And I think that's happening. And I think the other thing is, because of the progress, because of civil rights and because of other things, we have made progress. We have gotten many of the people, and I've been a part of it, to get people of color into the best prep schools, the best graduate schools. And so we have a mass of very smart people who can think analytically and strategically to affect change, not only for themselves, their companies, but for our society. That is a very powerful force. And I think the other thing, to be very candid, and that's why I'm so proud of what you're doing here, is that many of these young people I take so much pride in, that I've supported for the years, they say, maybe corporate America is not for me. I can learn from experience in corporate America. I can learn from my experience, maybe being a consultant at McKinsey or BCG. But at the bottom line is, I want to be an entrepreneur. And I believe in the free enterprise system, and I believe in entrepreneurism. The only thing I've said for years, you know, we have been a part of, meaning people of color, for the free enterprise system. But, you know, we've not been players in it. We've not been basic, major players in it. And especially true for people who are Black. We've been there, we've had small businesses, but we don't have the big businesses that can employ a lot of people and really affect change and get seats at the table. And that's what I say in the book. There's nothing wrong with being an entrepreneur. There's nothing wrong with being very wealthy. It's just when you have your wealth, what do you do with it? And if you get a chance to be at the table because you have wealth, don't be shy. Be bold, be innovative, be practical, be strategic. Because if your goal is to affect change, you can do it. And the more money you have, the better off you'll be to affect that change. But we all have to do it. At all sizes, businesses, we all got to play that game. But I think it's a different day.
No, it's an important point to make that it's not some type of threshold that I must be at this level in my wealth or here at this position at my firm in order to have some type of impact or to have a voice or have a seat at the table. It's really, it comes at any level, but with that, as you progress, to have those sort of checkpoints, am I using my role to have some type of positive change versus waiting and saying, when I'm at this level, then I'll be able to do more.
That is such a great insight. And often I have to, because people are coming up to me and they'll say, Mr. Lowry or Professor Lowry, whatever role I play. And they said, I really want to affect change in my corporation. I really believe in diversity and inclusion. I really believe in minority business. And I said, okay, get the basics first. Learn from their experience and just have a goal where you want to be to affect change. And sometimes you even have to take something. And there's been times, and I talk about it in the book, where I could have been reactive. I could have said something, but I had a different goal. I always had a dream that I would be a change agent to affect change. And sometimes, like you just said, you have to get to a certain place. You have to be at a higher plateau to really affect change.
Now, exactly. On that note, in your book, Change Agent, you provide this 10-point plan to accelerate Black economic development. On that note, you talk about the fact that after the demonstrations and marches, it's about what economic laws are passed that would have a positive impact on millions of Black people across the United States. What are some of the economic changes you believe need to happen now, both within government and the private sector? Of course, there's been a lot of different ideas out there. What do you think will work best?
Yeah, but I think the thing that with the 10 points, and we might get into them later, but I think the thing that I was saying and really addressing to the Black community is saying you got to change your mindset. You got to, I think corporate America has to change their mindset. I think government has to change their mindset. But those 10 points were really directed at Blacks and Black leaders, be they elected or non-elected. And I said, you got to change your mindset. And one of the things I've been advocating for years, is we have to get more wealth into our community. If you don't have wealth in these communities, and hopefully the new changes, corporate America is changing, and we got to get wealth, because without wealth, you can't grow businesses, you can't have power, and many of the problems that beset us will get worse. So I think that that's very important. And I always say, don't be embarrassed to make money. I mean, and I know that many of the great families that create huge sums of money been philanthropists, and they've been good ones and bad ones. I say there's nothing wrong with capitalism. It's just good capitalists and bad capitalists. And I want to have more Black capitalists. But I think the biggest thing to answer your question, and this is also mindset change, we have to think big. We have to think big. And I think that's another good sign that's coming out of the reflection that we're undergoing right now. But historically, and I started this many years ago when I did the Department of Commerce study in 1978, I said, you can't go into these communities with nickels and dimes, thinking you're going to change problems that are so complex that started almost 400 years ago. So I think we got to think big. The government has to think big. And I take my hat to Bloomberg, because he was a candidate, but he took the Greenwood concept and said, we got to throw in billions of dollars if we're going to affect change for Blacks. And I couldn't agree more. And I think we have to change the mindset in terms of how we work together. And one of the things I advocate throughout the book, but throughout my life, is that people of color working within themselves and within their communities have to accept that each one of us has something unique to offer. And if we all work in silos, if we only have our own little our own little companies, our own little nonprofits, we will never, ever succeed. And I strongly believe there's so many geniuses out there, especially in the potential in Silicon Valley, is that if we could support them in the way they should be supported with government policies, with training programs, whatever, with infusion of capital, then we could create businesses of all sizes. I really strongly believe that we're always going to have many small businesses. They should be supported. They're going to have what I call leisure-sized businesses, where businesses owners can own 2 cars, send their kids to college, and have, maybe have a summer place somewhere. And nothing wrong with that. And then some of them are going to have the potential to grow. And in my book, I talk about having 10 billionaires, 10 Black billionaires in 20 cities. And just imagine if we had 10 Robert F. Smith in 20 cities, what an impact that would be on the Black communities, on the communities that we live in the cities, but even on our nation. So I really believe that it's also mindset, and we have to pool our money. I think that's the other thing. We have to pool our money. Gentrification is going to occur. But the question that we as Black people and people who have wealth, are we investing our money to make sure gentrification happens in a way that is beneficial for Blacks and Browns? And if it's not, and you have people making these decisions, including elected officials and non-elected officials going into these areas and not dealing with that reality, what's going to happen? You're going to have gentrification. You're going to have businesses coming in. Money's going to be made, but what's going to happen to the residents? What's going to happen to those people? Did they get jobs? Did they get homes? Did they get residents? If we don't deal with it from a holistic place, we're going to be in bad shape. Because when we start dealing with COVID, it doesn't shock me. When even before the statistics came out, I said to somebody, I said, look, when the statistics come out, we're going to see more Browns and more Blacks are going to be affected. More Browns and Blacks are going to die. And I said, because it's economic. It's an economic issue. It's a health issue related to economics. And that's what we're seeing. And it was so obvious. It was obvious 20 or 30 years ago. We just didn't do anything about it. So it's time. We can't put it back. We can't kick the can down the road again. We just have to take action on all of this, I think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on minorities, specifically Blacks, is something that really sheds light on the economic disparity out there. Jim, I'd like to turn to some of the questions that we are getting from our members here. From Namzo OK asks you, Jim, you sound like a natural outgoing person, but how do you advise people who are introverts like myself on how to network?
How to network?
Yes.
Okay, I think if you're an introvert, that question always comes to me, And I think that, there's a group, there was a name for it, somewhere between an extrovert and an introvert. And you don't have to be one or the other. But I think for somebody to take an interest in you, you have to be very genuine. You have to tell that person across from you that you're sincere, that you can trust, they can trust you, and you can trust them. I wrote an article on mentoring, and I said part of the mentoring, the mentee has to be effective. And too often we think we're deserving of having the best mentors in the world without giving 1 second of thought on how I can be a better mentee. So I think what I recommended in that article, I could almost remember it by heart. I said the first thing you got to do is to show that you really want help. And I think if you're an introvert, you can do that as an extrovert or introvert, that you really want, and you're sincere in that. And when you ask for help and you get help from a mentor, remember what the mentor said, and then try and learn from the lessons learned from the mentor. And the next time you see that person, don't fill up the hour talking about you, but fill up the hour talking about how you learn from the advice given by the mentor. Nothing makes us feel better than you give advice to a young person, they follow your advice, and they do well with your advice. And that person can keep coming back to me for the next 20 years. But if I give my advice to somebody and all they want to do is talk about things and they never thank me, and I said, no, I haven't got time for it. And I'll be diplomatic, but that person will never get that hour again. And I think that the small thing, it's a very small thing, even for the introvert. Just ask at the end of every meeting, what can I do for you? Because they take it for granted. If we're wealthy, if I'm wealthy, or I'm this, I'm that I don't have needs. I don't have stress. That I don't have pressures coming onto me. And just having that question posed to me said, this person's different. I want to help them. So just always ask that question. What can I do for you? Yeah.
Such great advice, and having that empathy, even if you're on the receiving end, being the mentee, but having those check-ins, that's great. Jim, another question, if I may, here from Ron Chandler. He asks, Jim, I'm a few years younger than you. He's 58. This movement feels different. As a CIO, strategist, and engineer, inertia is important. What tactics can we employ to leverage the current energy to accelerate the forward moving and diversity and inclusion at the board level, C-suite, and entrepreneurship? And one stat I would throw out there, if you look at S&P 500 companies, a story I recently worked on, Black representation has been stuck at around 10% for quite some time now, and it's the same for minority women. That inertia, how do we change that?
Is it inertia or what? I mean, maybe we're playing with words here. Let me just be candid again, because this is who I am. I've been in diversity and inclusion all my life. I've designed some great programs. And I think, I gave I'm not going to tell you the company. I've done it big, Zoom things recently. And I said very clearly, your company is really run by white men. So you got to deal with that given. And people of color can help you. The people of color in the C-suite can give you guidance. We can have outside consultants give you guidance. But at the end of the day, it's the white man in power that's going to have to change, because it's a white institution. And if they don't assume that it's a high enough priority for whatever reasons, it's not going to change. So I think that the onus is on them to look inside. And I'm very clear when I say it is in the best interest of a corporation. It is best interest of a field. And if you're talking about Silicon Valley, he's a CIO. And I believe that there are some brilliant young people out there who are Black who could come up with their own app. Because many of you know very well, I mean, you're in California, many of these guys who are billionaires now, 7, 8 years ago, they didn't have a penny to their name. Why couldn't we have some Blacks come up with the right app or the right company to take advantage of growth in technology? I'm a strong believer that technology is the next major revolution. And if Black people and brown people are not part of it, we're going to lose out on this revolution. So I think, we have to do that. But I think there's going to have to be some bravery on the part of the Blacks and the browns in C-suite. I had opportunities throughout my career to be the quiet Black guy at the door. I never wanted to do that. I never did it. I think there's a way in which you can do it and not be counterculture. You can still be part of the culture, but to be able to convince people who are making major decisions that it is in their best interest to change the way they do it. And I think the biggest issue, and I said this at this corporation, and I was very sincere, when they tell me for years, and we're talking about 30, 40 years, that we believe in meritocracy. And I said, okay, I will tell you what I've been saying for 30 years. Sometimes meritocracy is in the eyes of the beholder. Okay? It's in the eyes. And there's a very, very thin line from being subjective and objective. So let's quit playing the games on how you evaluate women, minorities, of all kinds of, in terms of the subtle things that they don't quite look the same way, don't talk the same way. And be honest in terms of how we evaluate people and how we promote people, how we mentor people, how we sponsor people. Until we start doing that, the numbers will never change. They will never change. I don't want to be pessimistic, but I know what the keys are. And the key factors is that people in power have to look at, and they have to be uncomfortable. That's another thing I say. You got to be uncomfortable
and be okay with that discomfort too.
You got to be, and you got to be uncomfortable in the dialogue. I mean, I tell people who are color, and I tell people who are not. I said sometimes you're gonna have to learn to flinch. And they said, what the hell you mean, Jim? To learn how to flinch. I'm saying, people are going to tell you something, and it's going to make you kind of flinch when they say it. But if you can just be strong enough and bold enough to reflect and say, that kind of makes sense, or the numbers tell me something, or the logic tells me something. And on Monday morning, I have to change. And I think change is very difficult. Change is very challenging. But what you're talking about, and what many of the people on this call are talking about, is change. We have to change. And sometimes it's not very comfortable. But if you have a greater goal and you can look beyond that, and I think that's been the biggest problem we've had, is we only live, and I would say this today, we're at a reflection point. And if all of our actions are quick fixes without thinking about the complexity of what we're trying to do, we won't have our desired end results.
Yeah, and to add to that, maybe making diversity also part of compensation. If it's sort of it's part of your bonus, part of your a metric when getting promoted, then maybe it will really force managers to think about hiring minorities and people of different color.
Melody Hobson says that in all of her talks. She says it won't change until money is put on that metric.
Right. What is your 10-point plan? If you could just sort of give us a synopsis.
Quickly? You want me to do it quickly? How much time I got? No, I'll be quick.
No, up to you. However long you want.
Well, one, I think I talked about it. I think it's a mindset of accepting that capital in our culture is so important. And until we grow capital, and I say this, and I say it in a really a positive way, because I went to a private school that was predominantly Jewish. And I saw that, Jewish people, 6 million, there are 6 million Jews. But they have a lot of capital. And so not anything that they're not suffering like we are too, but they're in a better position to play the game. They're in a better position to aggregate wealth for their communities and for the people within it. And I think we have to do the same thing. So one of the things that just hit me in the Pew thing, through 1983 and 2015, white household net worth increased 42% from 100,000 to 141,000. Hispanic household net worth increased 40% from 9,800 to 13,700. But the African-American net worth decreased 16% from 13,000 to 11,000. So if you have that and capital is not coming into our community, you can see where the COVID, the next COVID's coming, whatever it is, and we're going to suffer. I think the other thing too, we have to work and think about building businesses at all three levels. I think we have to continue to support the mom and pop, the micro businesses. They're the anchor of the U.S. free enterprise system, but we have to create other businesses that can employ people. I've done a lot of analysis. Tim Bates in Detroit and Wayne State has done analysis. Black and brown people hire their own. There's direct correlation. So the more companies we have, we can support it. I think the other thing which is very important is we should only, and this is going to be controversial, but we only should support people who are elected, who get it, and can demonstrate they've had impact on their community. And I say in the book, I don't care how close I know, I have a close relationship, or how great the orator is, or how long they've been in office. If every year, their community is going down economically, I said, don't put them back in office. And I don't care what race. And we're seeing that. So don't just feel just because a person is black or brown that we should reelect them. The metric should be, what are they doing? What can we demonstrate that they have done that really help us? So I think that that's the other thing that we have to do. I think the fourth thing is there are more people now in C-suites than ever before. But where I've seen it happen is when the C-suite person who's in those weekly or monthly meetings reaches back and fosters minority business growth. It's been my experience, the increase is dramatic. If you don't have the C-suite people, even though it's not their responsibility to say that, usually it doesn't take off. So the people who've been in this space, minority business, I've known some of them for 20 years. They're big-hearted, nice, they have no budgets, they have no clout. So the clout comes from the C-suite. And when you start having the C-suite and the CEO saying, and we're seeing this now recently, that we're going to put money out there, we're going to support Black businesses and minority businesses, that's a different. 5, I think high-income Blacks must pool their capital to buy properties. So that gets back to what I was saying in terms of really leveraging our money. I think we have to increase the number of people of color and women on boards, but I also throw in that it doesn't do anybody any favor, the shareholders, the corporations, the CEO, anybody, to have people who are just Black or brown in name only and unfortunately can never even say anything about diversity. They just sit, they collect board fees. To me, that's not progress. So I think we got to get people in there who will be very strong contributor to the company. Maybe even have somebody else articulate the needs of browns and Blacks and women, but they should be very strong in advocacy for us. I think the other thing too, that we're in a different place than when I started. And when I lived in Africa, it was 1961. Okay, now you fast forward, and now you have billionaires in Nigeria. You have billionaires in South Africa. And from my experience, and I was just there a couple of years ago, and they're reaching out to me again, they still want to do business with people of color. But there's a disconnect between these huge sums, fortunes of these entrepreneurs who are major players in some of these companies, and we don't talk to them. I think we've had people over the years who had big hearts, but didn't understand what, a pro forma was or EBITDA was. And so as a result, you had very well-intentioned people, but never affecting the change that African leaders wanted. So I think that's the other one. I think the other point I would put in terms of aid, we should only support nonprofits who demonstrate to us they're worthy of our money. And if we can't do that, then I think we're in bad shape, because there are many nonprofits who have gotten money over the years, and I know them, I know the heads of them, no impact. Nothing was never leveraged. I think the 9th thing is we have to conduct research. I think when I talk about things, I talk about industries, I talk about trends, I'm amazed how little we know. We're talking about the talented 10th or the talented what, they just don't know. And I think one of the things I've said is that I really take my hat off to all the brilliant professors who teach African-American history and culture. But if you don't talk about those things with an economic lens, then we're not educating our kids the way they should. They should know about the free enterprise. They should know about the contributions of people have made, and even about the Tulsa massacre. They should know about these things to be better able to fight now. And the 10th one, I always kind of laugh at, because people say, Lowry, you gotta put that in there. I said, we gotta have stop the crabs in the barrel. As long as the crabs in the barrel concept. So every time somebody raises up, a Black person tries to bring them down, that's not helping us. And I said, I've been a product. I've been, a victim of it. I'm past it. I'm not vindictive, but I just shake my head. I want to help every person I can, whatever their age, whatever their background, because I think as we all help one another, the stronger we'll be.
Such great advice. I took notes again, even though I've read your book, but very comprehensive and important and candid real-time advice and tips that any entrepreneur, journalist, or company can use. One question out there from Janine, is there one company, we've heard so many different announcements, Netflix yesterday, McDonald's the other day. What company do you think has done a really good job at responding to racial injustice and using an innovative approach to creating a level playing field for Black Americans?
That's a great question, because I think once again, I've been old enough that I can see the stars come and go. At one time, Xerox was the company. I could say Xerox had the right board members. They had a plan to elevate, people of color into key C-spots, and they had a Black woman eventually become the CEO. So I think, American Express under Ken Chenault did a similar kind of thing that you're doing. I would say in a lot of ways right now, for me, is AT&T. AT&T, I think, is getting it together in terms of economic development. They do, most people don't realize, they do $17 billion with people of color, minorities, $17 billion. There's no other company near them. Plus, maybe, and this is a factor of it, they have more people who have senior P&L responsibility than any company I know. And they even, and I was a part of it, they had a goal last year of putting $3 billion in the hands of Black people. That's amazing. And just think if everybody followed that thing. And even in Chicago, AT&T is doing something where they're saying, here are the 15 things we're going to do for the South Side and West Side. And these are our metrics. So evaluate us next. And so they created call centers in the inner city. And what they have said, and I believe them, is those call centers work just as effectively or efficiently as the call centers anywhere else. And they did it in the communities where these Black people live. So they wouldn't have to deal with the problems of transportation. So I give AT&T a lot of credit for that. You know.
That's great. We actually just had Randall Stevenson today on CNBC discussing some of the changes they're making internally.
Well, one of the things I want to tell you, because you're from the media, even now we know AT&T bought AOL Time Warner. This is a good story. AOL Time Warner used to be separate, you know, as you know, and I worked for Dick Parsons when Dick Parsons was at AOL and he was the CEO. What they did, I think, is another model. When Dick Parsons was the CEO of AOL Time Warner, they had 5 different ways that they wanted to improve Blacks and Browns at AOL Time Warner. 1, they wanted to increase the number of people, you know, in terms of HR. 2, they were going to increase minority business. 3, they were going to make sure their contributions were going to have impact. But the thing I will always remember as I was working there, and I was working with all the major presidents at each division, that Dick Parsons and the board say in every media, be it print, be it TV, be it movies, we want to have people of color depicted differently. And we want to have representation on all of our different products so that people will see Black people and brown people differently. And I thought that was great because you don't know this, but maybe it's in the book. But I was a co-host of the first Black television show in New York. Why did that happen? Because there was something called the Kerner Report that said that Blacks and Browns were not even seen on television. And so that's when we started having these TV programs. But that wasn't that long ago when there were no Blacks or Browns on television. Wow. But I think they did it better. And that's why I'm posing it to you. But you're seeing it, and I believe in it.
That's a great story. Thank you. And you're right. We're starting to see more diversity on air and off air, but there's definitely room for improvement.
Yes.
All right. One of the last questions to you, Jim. Any advice for starting a nonprofit that will benefit the Black and Brown community? You did sort of speak to this, and also how they should go about acquiring funding if they have a good idea that helps the Black community. How they go about funding and the best ways to do it. Go ahead.
Great question. And I will preface it by saying foundations and companies are now looking at it differently. So they're looking at, they're being very analytical. We're going to give to this company or this nonprofit. 1, what is your target? What is your mission? So you have to be clearly to make a difference in why you're going to get money somebody else. Your mission has to be clearly and articulated in a way that is attractive to people who are going to get money. Secondly, they should have a plan. Just treat it like it's a business. And if you don't have the capabilities on your team or go out and buy it or get people like me who will do it for free. I mean, so you got to get the plan because most people are saying, where do you want to go? We give you the money in 2020. What is it going to translate in 2025? 3, get the leadership that's going to make a difference. The sincerity of the leaders are very, very important. You can look them in the eye and say, this is why I want to put my money in that. And then the leader has to surround his or herself with very strong people, hopefully smarter than they are. Because if you don't have a good team, your nonprofit will not work. So once you articulate that, you put that in a plan, you start to implement it, and then you demonstrate, you execute whatever the sum of money you get, be it 100,000, 200,000, you execute in a way which you can go back to that foundation and say, I heard you. Here's what you want to do. Here's what we did. I guarantee you'll get more money. Guarantee.
Guaranteed.